Good evening. Welcome to the August 11th Downers Grove Village Council meeting. We apologize for the delay. We were in executive session earlier beginning at 6 p.m. tonight. As we normally begin our public meetings, we'd like to say the Pledge of Allegiance. For those of us here, please join us and rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Megan, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Earl? Here. Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Here.
Commissioner Colavini?
Here.
Commissioner Gray?
Here.
Mayor Burnett?
Here. We're all here. Welcome back, Rich. As with previous COVID-related meetings, we'll be taking electronic input throughout the course of tonight. To submit a public comment, please go to the Submit Public Comment link on the current week's meetings page on the village website, www.downers.us, in the lower left-hand corner, anytime before or during the meeting. As with previous council meetings, there are also copies of the agenda here in council chambers on either side of the room. And if you're following at home, follow that same link to this week's meetings. You'll see the agenda items as well as all the things that are being circulated up here and presented by our staff through the course of the evening. First item on tonight's agenda, is there a motion concerning minutes of previous council meetings?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the August 4th, 2020 minutes as presented.
Second.
Any comments, council? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. This is the public comments portion of our meeting. We do not have anyone in council chambers, I think. Mike, is he here? Where'd Mike go? Here. Mike, did we get any comments submitted over the last 15 or 20 minutes?
We have not, Mayor. No additional remarks.
Thank you for checking. The short agenda tonight, we have just a couple of items. The first thing is a consent agenda. Is there a consent agenda motion?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. No active agenda or first reading tonight, but we do have some very important business. The manager's report tonight will continue to discuss our long-range planning. With that, over to Dave.
Thank you, Mayor Barnett. But before we get to the published agenda item, I'm going to go with an audible and put two other items on there. First is some information about yesterday's windstorm that went through our village. Yesterday between 3:30 and about 4 o'clock, we did experience a significant storm. We have been responding yesterday and today to 94 calls for service for parkway tree damage, 94. Some of those are complete downed trees. Most of them are downed branches. That tree damage was focused primarily on the central and northern portions of our village. Our village crews in Public Works got to work right away on the response. They are out removing debris related to parkway tree damage at this time. They've been doing it since yesterday afternoon. They're working on up to 12-hour shifts to expedite the removal of the debris, and it is anticipated that this work will be completed by the end of the week. We have also called in extra street sweeping services to assist us in that debris cleanup. Village staff and village elected officials are aware of the power outages that remain throughout our village, and we are aware that ComEd is reporting those may have an extended time to restoration. Village elected officials, village staff members have contacted ComEd, will continue to contact ComEd as advocates for our residents to do everything we can to ensure that ComEd moves quickly to restore power. ComEd has been in contact with Doug Kozlowski and our team throughout this event. They are assuring us that they're moving as quickly as they safely can, and they have pulled in crews from neighboring states to assist to try to get everybody up to full power as soon as possible. Any questions from the council on our storm report?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I want to provide an update on the COVID-19 financial response plan. This was originally presented to the council in April, and we've been providing updates on a regular basis. Obviously, the pandemic is significantly negatively impacting our revenues. We've been talking about that at multiple council meetings. Our goal is to be a sustainable and resilient village government, and our objectives are to continue to provide essential services during this crisis throughout the balance of 2020 and into the future. We also need to be financially prepared to respond to future emergencies or disasters, like a windstorm that came through yesterday. You may recall this graphic. At the beginning of this, back in April, staff used a range of revenue projections in the preparation of the financial response plan. And at that time, our most conservative revenue projections, the ones that are shown here on the slide, showed revenue decline of 50% or more in most revenue sources that would result in a worst-case scenario gap of over $20 million. We, of course, have updated that worst-case scenario. We think the worst-case scenario financial gap for our current year is $9.3 million. You may recall also we've been talking about our tiered approach in response for a couple of months now. Here it is again on the screen. You can see if we worked our way through all of the tiers, we would be able to fill that large gap. We are implementing tiers 1, 2, and 3 at this point. We think they will be sufficient to get us through any revenue shortfalls for the totality of 2020. We showed this graph last week. Again, it shows the low and high revenue projections for the end of 2020 and into 2021. Again, worst case scenario, $8.3, $9.3 million range for both years. Here's where new information comes in, and we've chosen to provide this information graphically because we think it's frankly a little easier to understand. So you're going to look at a series of graphs on various revenue sources. The first one here is our sales tax revenues. The actual 2020 performance, revenue performance, is shown in red. The other lines are last year to this point and the budget for this year. Through May, sales tax revenues are down 3.9% compared to our budgeted number. The May revenues for sales tax were off 19.2% compared to May of last year. Remember, we had a very strong first 2 months of the year, right? So you can see that graphically shown here in the red line. Now you all also notice an uptick in that red line. Performance in sales tax appears to be improving after a very poor performance in April. So now I'm going to go to the next graph, which is home rule sales tax. Again, red line is the current year. Home rule sales tax are down 15% compared to our budgeted number through this point of the year, 1.5. May revenues were off 30% compared to last May. And again, you can see the numbers bottom out in April and start to come up a bit in May. Next is food and beverage tax. We have an additional month of information on this revenue source, so it goes through June. Down 21.5% compared to our budget for the year. June revenues were down only 7.7% compared to June of last year. We had a strange downturn last year in June, which immediately recovered in July, so that number may be a little bit of an outlier. What's really important to understand here is the shape of the curve, the red line. You can see it bottom out in April and steady rebound numbers in May and June. Here's a graph with a very different shape. This is hotel tax revenues. Hotel tax revenues are down nearly 60% compared to the budget for the year. And you can see that the June revenues were off 91% June of last year. You heard people talk about U-shaped curves where they go really flat for a long period of time at the start of this pandemic. Unfortunately, this is a revenue source that has that shape. We are still waiting for the U to start to form on the other side. We have had a couple of very important businesses, hotel businesses, reopen their doors recently, so we hope to start to see an uptick in July and August. As this council knows, we will continue to monitor all of our revenues and expenses and continue to report them out to the village council. We continue to implement our tiered approach, which is a very nimble and reactive approach to making sure we are resilient and sustainable. And we'll continue to report it out to the public. In fact, that's actually what's next on our agenda here is the actual agenda item for long-range planning update. I will pause there, see if Village Council has any comments, questions, concerns for our COVID-19 update.
Anybody got any questions for Dave on those updated data? I'll just remind everybody watching at home that this plan is not only available here, but it's available on our website. Staff has done an excellent job not only of helping us develop a plan, but of keeping us up to date as the plan evolves and moves through those tiers and through the months. And I'd encourage everyone at home to try and follow that as well. It's important information about your village. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, now for the actual agenda item that appears on the posted agenda is a continuing discussion of the 2021 long-range plan update. Last week we talked in detail and we presented strategies and solutions for dealing with a financial gap of up to $8.3 million in the year 2021. Helps us prepare our 2021 budget, which will be published in late October and considered by this council in November and December. We got excellent direction from the village council, each and every council member giving us direction that is now reflected with two small revisions to the actual plan. The first is we changed the wording in the objectives section regarding service levels. We tried to capture some of the flexibility language that this council was using last week. That we are not intending to cut services as a way to respond to the financial revenue shortfalls, but we are looking for flexibility in how we provide services to make sure we respond to our community and the direction that the council may provide. The second change to the plan was in reference to our revenue enhancement. We had provided a long list of potential revenue enhancements as part of that plan. And after hearing council members talk, we have narrowed that list of revenues in the plan down to just a couple. One is a potential increase in the food and beverage tax. The other is potential changes to our ambulance billing. Those were the two revenue sources that we heard echoed throughout council comments. We did provide council and the public with additional information about ambulance billing practices. Now you also see on that list property tax increases. We heard the council loud and clear that that is not a desired way to address a financial shortfall. However, we always keep it on the list as sort of a safety net last resort. So we did hear the council say that is a last resort, but we also kept it on the plan just in case that we may need it for some level of discussion at the time the budget rolls around. With that, we are just looking for further confirmation from the council that those two changes based on last week are what you were looking for. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dave. Anybody want to start? Or could just nod too, if that's what you want. Nobody? All right.
Why not?
Greg, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank staff for the updates to the plan. The headline on modifications to service levels gave me a little heartburn at first, and then once you read the actual description, things get a little better.
Yeah, we had a hard time with that headline. We were working really hard on it.
I think you captured what we were looking for, which is if we can move things around to get them more efficient or put them in a place where they make more sense. That's really more, I think, at least what I was trying to capture, and I think you've done a nice job with that. And the narrowing of the revenue options, I think, makes perfect sense. No one wants to raise property taxes, but that is the lever that we can absolutely count on when it comes to raising revenue. And as a result, I think we have to keep it on the list until we're ready to absolutely rule it out. So I think we're in a good spot with the long-range plan as it exists, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Greg. Anybody else good? Commissioner Wallace?
Sure, I'll go next. I just want to thank staff again. This is not a position that we thought we were going to be in. You guys have done so much work. I feel comfortable, and yes, as Commissioner Jose said, this statement up here and trying to word this in such a way that consider modifications to service levels, excluding substantial. So we're it was good. And I think it was the best way to say what we're all trying to say and what we're all thinking. I'm comfortable with both food and beverage tax and the ambulance fees. We need to leave property tax levy on here. I understand that, knowing that at this time, we're likely not going to pull that trigger, but do agree that it needs to remain on here. So again, thank you. I feel comfortable with all the revisions and information presented.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? Rich?
I see this a little bit differently than my colleagues. First of all, the things I agree with, if we have to raise taxes, I think food and beverage and ambulance fees would have the least amount of impact because those are more discretionary and it's paid by insurance, and plus we're not asking to be the most expensive. We're right in the middle of the pack. I'm comfortable with that. I don't think the food and beverage amount at 1.5% is onerous. But I also recognize that even though we're not raising levies for general operations for the property tax, we are passing through a pretty significant increase from 1.16 million to 1.95 million to our residents. And some of our residents are elderly, some 18-20% are fixed incomes like Social Security. And then we also not only have the seniors, we have those younger families that are just getting their career started. And, I'd like Downers Grove to embrace a generational situation where we can have young people starting out, mid-career people, and that people can retire here. But in order to do that, we have to make it affordable. So if I were king and had a chance to close $1 million budget gap, I would go to our some 300.9 full-time equivalent employees, say, would you be willing to sacrifice and take a 3.8% salary cut to get us through this period of time, and then we'll pay you back later, and before we go to our residents. Because even though the food and beverage tax and the ambulance is not regressive, certainly the property tax is. And I know there's kind of a wringing our hands, we can't do anything about this because it's a state mandate, but that still doesn't ameliorate the reality that it's going to hit people. And there are a lot of people who are unemployed, a lot of people whose household income may have dropped rather significantly in the last few months through no fault of their own. I think we need to remember that. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Rich. Anyone else? Kevin?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out, it's interesting, like we have read through several variations of the current plan, and if there are residents that haven't had a chance to take a look at that, I would just encourage them to really do so. There's a lot of thought, there's a lot of planning that goes into it, and it's interesting what you take away each time you read it. This time around, having read through whatever the dates were, there's something about uncertainty, data delay, financial sustainability that seems to jump out this time around. And so even as we're reading through this, I again am in support of food and beverage. I think one of the items that I kind of wavered on over the past week was really looking at an item of gasoline after last week, saying that I wasn't, but again, coming back to a place of wanting to not have anything to really put anything out there that causes an impact on households given where we are, especially after seeing the numbers from this past week. The other thing, just kind of talking through, as we're talking through kind of cuts and delays, if you've been on the other side, if you've ever been on the other side of what that looks like. I grew up in a household of a fireman and a public school teacher for 30 years, and if you've ever been on the other side of what that looks like and what that translates into, it is way more significant than what I think it shows up on paper. And so I definitely am, I understand where we're coming from on all these different points, but I think I would like to see us move in a direction that helps us to find other ways to close some of this gap. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Leslie?
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm in agreement with Commissioner Gray on that. I feel as though what we've put in here. I appreciate the change and the modifications to service levels. Again, yeah, those words gave me a little bit of pause, but then as I continued reading, I got much more comfortable with them. But ultimately, we are a service organization, and our residents are expecting a similar level of service as we've seen. We've crunched our staff kind of for a pretty long time. I believe this is the first year that we haven't had any decreases. I'm comfortable with thinking about a pay freeze, but not quite a cut. We've already kind of asked folks to do a lot. I'm willing to be a little bit more flexible on an increase of food and beverage if it kind of gets to that point, but where we are now, I would say I'm comfortable with the plan that we've put forward, and I'm fine with the ambulance and food and beverage increases.
Thank you.
I guess I'm last.
We're still going to come to Greg.
It is tough to be on the other side. We were one of the folks who got a pay reduction at our house for 3 months, so it was tough to swallow. My daughter's a school teacher. She's going through the ringer right now because everything continues to change. It's you watch it. It's a whole lot harder on the other end, and we don't offer. I guess there's the pension, if you can call it that, but there's not a lot of other perks with this job, and you're not always having great pay, you're not always having great hours, but adding to the problem by reducing our staff or our service levels, it's just pushing the problem off on a larger scale. Cutting people's employment just starts a different chain of events, and I don't want to see that happen. We've narrowed it down to the people we've got over the years, and we've got really good people working for us, and we try to look out for them as much as we can. I think it's our responsibility, and so I don't want to see any service cuts, because that means people cuts. And if somebody leaves and it's a voluntary opening, then we can do our best to try to absorb it. Sometimes we can't do that. Sometimes we have to grow in a different way. But holding the line as best we can, I think, is the best thing we can do. I'm definitely for the food and beverage tax option. Looking at the ambulance fees, I was fine with. I really don't want to go to property taxes. I think you all know that. I voted no last time on the budget because I wasn't happy with the property tax component, because I feel it's too burdensome on fixed income folks. But you can't really take everything off the table. You have to start with something. And who knows now, between now and when we actually get the budget, these numbers are going to change 2 more times. So we can only do what we can do now. I feel like this is the right plan to go with right now. Let the staff start working on the budget, and we'll see when we start working on the budget and what we have to pass. It's all going to start shaking out a little more. So do the best we can without having to burden anybody at this point. So thank you to staff for all the hard work you keep doing, because these numbers are a constant moving target, and it's very frustrating. And thank you.
Thank you, Marge. You wanted to come back.
Yeah, but if you want to go first, go ahead.
Let me jump in for a second. We'll come back around. If anybody wants to come back around, it's fine. We have, I just want to, I'm not going to repeat my colleagues. I want to expand the conversation a little bit. We have an organization here that is, you've heard us talk about it being lean. It is super, super lean. One of the things that we struggle with regularly is I don't think we do as good a job as we possibly could in describing that and helping our residents understand that. We are different, very different than Washington, D.C. We are very different than Springfield. We have a lean organization, and we don't run deficits. And so the one thing that I struggle with, you heard me last week wanting to talk about a wider variety of revenue sources, is we are delivering those services that people expect, and we're going to keep delivering them, and we've all committed to that. but I'm questioning whether or not there's more that's needed. And when we avoid some of the other possible revenue sources, we sort of foreclose that. We put a closure on that. We say that this is it. This is our limit. At the end of the day, we can't avoid property taxes forever. I told some of my colleagues earlier in some conversations one-on-one, you might not want to sit too close to me in the camera shot tonight, because, look, almost all of our cost is payroll, because we deliver services. And we make commitments to our employees that are long-term, and we make commitments to our residents that are long-term. And frankly, those terms expand beyond economic cycles. And so property taxes has to stay on this list. We should try and avoid it. You'll keep hearing me talk about trying to avoid it, but saying we're going to take it off the list doesn't make any sense to me. We can't take it off the list. If I was, people that have been hanging around up here long enough with me, like Greg, know that if I thought there was an opportunity to save from a cost reduction standpoint, I'd be pounding on the table trying to get it done. I know that A, we do regularly, and B, our staff brings those to us, and C, the evidence is there. Our property taxes, which nobody likes to pay, we've raised them twice in a decade for operational issues. So think about that for a minute. In 10 years' time, all that payroll, 2 property tax increases. It didn't amount to much. Last year was $175,000 or some, marginal, nominal kind of number. We have a great organization and we deliver great services, and we need to keep doing that. And so I'm supportive of this plan. I'm personally a little disappointed because I think we're constraining ourselves too much. I think there is more we could do, and I think there are revenue opportunities that would help fund that are not on property taxes. But I am going to echo, I think, everybody's comments up here that property taxes have to stay on there. It has to be one of the sources that we consider. For those watching at home who are grinding their teeth and looking at their property tax bill and trying to figure out, how to make that work, please know that your village organization is much smaller than it was 10 years ago, and we're still delivering services. That's a fact. Your property taxes from a village operational standpoint have simply not been raised very often. That's a fact. So if we find ourselves in a situation where a pandemic takes 22% or more of our revenue stream for a year or a year and a half in an unforeseeable fashion, and we end up at the end of some road having to hit property taxes, I think that's entirely reasonable, and people shouldn't be too upset by it. It's kind of reality. There are not a bunch of people sitting in an office looking for something to do every day in the village of Downers Grove. It doesn't matter which department it is. We are super lean, and I would invite anybody that wants more details on that, because we're not going to get into them tonight, but nobody up here would be bashful about describing that either. It's a great story to tell. We don't tell it often enough. So I'm supportive of where we are and thankful for the work that's been done, and looking forward to, as Marge said, working out a budget from this. This is the beginning of 2021 for those watching at home. But I do think we could do more, and I'm a little disappointed we're not stretching on some of those revenue sources. So hopefully we'll keep them in our back pockets. Greg, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. With regard to some of the comments earlier, I think we've done a pretty good job of explaining that our village staff has worked incredibly hard through all of this. They've proven nimble yet again in coming up with the response plan and now the long-range plan, and making sure that we're handling this in the best way possible and in the Downers Grove tradition. I think at this point to turn around and ask them to give up part of their salary is misguided. Obviously, times are tough. There's a lot of folks out there that are hurting. And as other folks have said, I've been on the other side of that in the past, and nobody wants to be there, and I wish the best to all of those who are stuck there right now. But we're also talking about a lot of folks who have stepped up and done more, who have faced an incredible amount of risk. And when we're talking about especially our first responders, we're talking about folks that are on the front line of having to deal with people on a day-to-day basis, dealing with COVID patients when they have to. And all of that translates to just an incredible amount of risk that we all were asked not to take. We were asked to stay home as much as possible. These folks don't have that option. And to ask folks that have taken that risk, or the rest of our staff who have continually stepped up and found new ways to do things more efficiently in a more lean manner, to now take a pay cut, I think is not the right way to go. So obviously, there are folks out there that are hurting, and that's why we're talking about the best ways we can find to do what we need to do in a way that, as Commissioner Gray mentioned, is trying to avoid hitting those folks. And to the extent we have to raise the property tax, we're doing it on pension obligations. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. These police officers and firefighters and the rest of our staff earn every benefit they get. And we can talk about it's forced on us by Springfield, and that's fine, because it's true. But the fact of the matter is they earn every benefit they get. And I'm comfortable with doing what we have to do in order to cover those payments. So, thank you, Mayor.
Anyone else want to come back around? Rich?
The thing I didn't state is I do agree that we should keep the service levels as they are, particularly with life safety situations. I mean, you could argue should it take an hour longer to plow streets, but I don't think that's going to move the needle. I would actually like us to reach out to other units of government to see if we could do some serious consolidation. There was a meeting, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago at Downers Grove South, where all the units of government got together. There were about 5 residents in the room, which was disappointing, and talked about that. I don't think anything meaningful came out of that, but if there are areas that we could look for that, I think that could be creative, and I don't know what it is. It could be HR functions, it could be IT functions, certainly fleet maintenance, the use of gasoline facilities and things like that. And the other thing I want to reiterate is I'm really proud of our village employees. I'm proud of our union employees. We have a good relationship with our firefighters, our police. They do a good job. They've got a great attitude. We don't have a lot of the problems. I'm sorry I wasn't at the listening session, but I was on vacation. I couldn't be there. But I'm holding that out as a model to people, that instead of deriding the Downers Grove Police Department, you should be holding this up as an example to other municipalities. Hey, if you want to do it right, do what Downers Grove is doing. That's not to say that we can't make any improvements. But, my opinion is not to force this and create an adversarial situation where one doesn't exist. We do have this family kind of environment. We do have long-term employees because they like to work here, and we support that. My contention is, unless you ask, you're never going to know. And that's what I think we should do before we automatically go to our residents and say you've got to pay up more.
Okay. Anybody else? Dave, one clarification, just so that, because there's been a lot of conversation from the public here. If you're looking at, I couldn't get it on the screen. I apologize. Hang on a minute.
We can pull something up for you, Mayor. I think we have the other presentation from last week on there, right?
Page 6 of the link for tonight's meeting.
Okay. Is that the written report? Okay.
All right, sorry, this is a little awkward. I screwed this up, guys. If you're
No,
watching at home...
What's awkward is that Mike usually does all this, and I am not capable on the fly, so Mike's going to help us out.
I'll just describe it. If you're watching at home, please go to our meeting agenda for tonight. Under Manager's Report, there is a link there. And what you'll see is a 2021 long-range plan. If you scroll down to page 6 of that, you will see a section that talks about existing revenues and potential increases. I think the important thing to underscore there is, for the moment, what we are trying to do is avoid hitting the property taxes. So for those that are watching at home that are focused on that particular subject, that is where we stand for the moment. So.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of footnotes, if I could. The conversation about our valued employees and great working relationships and first responders also extends to our teammates in the Public Works Department. So just a shout out to make sure they were not inadvertently left off the list. I know everybody on the council and everybody on staff knows that. I just wanted to make sure that's clear to everybody who's watching at home and in the room here.
I love them equally as
Yes.
well. Thanks for the fill-in.
As far as how we use this plan, this is Commissioner Earl was speaking of this earlier. You know, really, we try to look about 3 years out, sometimes 3 to 5 years out, to look for trends and issues, and that's what this plan is all about. In this changing environment with drastic changes in our revenues and expense models, we really use this as a way to launch our budgeting process. And so, as Commissioner Earl was saying, these are the concepts that will drive the budget. The actual numbers in the budget will look a little bit different, but you will be able to tie them back to the plan that the council has talked about tonight. So the budget will come out at the end of October. We will tie it back to this plan. Everybody can follow along at home. And then in November and December, the council will consider any and all changes to the budget that they see fit and move towards an operating plan for 2021. But the budget is only part of our long-range plan. It's an important part, but the other part is our work plan, the tasks that this council would like to achieve while this council is seated. So next week, we will talk about priority action items. That may bleed a little bit over into September as well. So that's what everybody can expect in terms of next steps in our long-range planning and our budgeting process. And with that, that ends our manager's report tonight, Mayor.
Thank you, Dave. Mike, during that discussion, did we hear from anybody online?
Does not appear so. I'm going to check to make sure. Nope, no, Mayor, no additional comments.
Thanks for checking. That takes us to mayor and council member reports. This is an opportunity for council members to say what's on their mind, talk about things going on in the community. We'll kind of go around the horn, and I think we'll start with the new guy, Rich.
Yeah, it's good to be back here. We had a nice, relaxing trip. Got to see families in parts of the country and places like Colorado where it's mandatory to wear masks, so people don't have to question. I thought that was really neat. Everyone followed suit. Other places like South Dakota, not so much. Particularly people on Harley Davidsons, I guess there was some issue with that. But it's good to be back, and staff, wonderful, wonderful work on this long-range plan and budget.
Thanks, Rich. Leslie?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that I know the last few days in Chicagoland have been pretty trying for a lot of folks. It's divided, engaged people, and angry rhetoric full of right and wrong thinking. But the world, I just want to remind everyone that the world is much more complex and nuanced than that. So as we experience crises, layered on top of crises, please just continue to listen to the guidance of experts, have the difficult and uncomfortable conversations with neighbors, and always assume the best of one another. So that's it.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. Reminder that you can still sign up for the Barbecue Bolt 5K, Saturday, August 29th. Go to dgparks.org/BBQ Bolt. And another reminder that Downers Grove Junior Women's Club is still, they've actually extended their collection for Hope's Front Door school supplies. And they are still in need of backpacks is a big item, and also Sharpies, which was left off of the original list. And you may be thinking, why do they still need supplies? A lot of students are going to be working remotely. Students still need those supplies even in their homes, and the backpack is a great place to help them organize all of their things. So those are some things that are needed. And again, just a reminder, if you are medically able, to please wear your mask when you are out and about. I wore my mask for the first time today for 5.5 hours talking with parents and students. It was uncomfortable, but it's possible. So please, if you are medically able, remember to continue wearing your mask when you're around town. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Kavanaugh?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention that last week, the Village of Downers Grove held our listening conversations around the topic of policing, and I thought it was very interesting. I think when it comes to any topics that are just hard, that's the best way to actually put them, the tendency is to kind of shy away and pull away from them. But what I'd like to do first is to commend our village for stepping out and initiating a conversation with Dave and Chief Gillette and Michael Childress, I think, and Joy and Superintendent Thiel. So that was really helpful to start this conversation. Over the years that I've been in the village, I've heard terminology, vocabulary that you just kind of say, hey, that's interesting. And there were certain topics that were discussed by residents that I thought were interesting. They helped to bring a little light on some of the issues being discussed. One issue, I remember a resident talking about something that we've talked about here on the dais is weaponizing police against people of color. Another issue was a terminology that was used within conversation that I won't repeat right now, but just was interesting to hear in an open forum. And this is just not to embarrass anyone. And also, one of the residents brought to the attention that on the evening that we had a shutdown, that residents were asked to inform via a Facebook channel if they saw anything that didn't kind of meet the needs of the village. And I thought that the comments were interesting because about a month or so prior, I asked the village to give numbers related to that very specific question. And what I remember about that specifically as I listened was that it sounded like, and I'm sure I'll mix this up a little bit, but as we were preparing to shut down Downers Grove in preparation for what could possibly come, residents were asked to, hey, let us know if you see anything suspicious. And the communication that started to roll across this Facebook channel was along the lines of African Americans or people of color as being suspicious. And so what's interesting about that is I asked the village about a month ago to pull numbers, and I said after looking at them, I simply wanted to sit on them. I didn't want to do anything with them, but here are the numbers that I asked for. I asked for a year-over-year period, how many suspicious person calls did the village get? The village of Downers Grove turned in 575 calls of suspicious individuals, 6 arrests and 65 police reports resulting from that. What that translates into, unless there's some new technology that kind of allows law enforcement to locate people of color, what this really translates into is that our residents are calling law enforcement on individuals that they feel are suspicious. And that word suspicious immediately took me to a place, especially after knowing some of the stories, that word suspicious really did feel like people of color or African Americans, and that's really the reality. And hearing the story from this past week where someone spoke specifically to that point was really just that it was that the reason why I held back. Now, I could have asked for drill down information that gave a little bit more clarity, but I kind of knew what that meant. And so I would simply ask, I guess I would just simply ask that we are responsible for making decisions that deal with tonight. We spoke specifically to how to handle things from a financial perspective. I would simply ask for 575 calls of suspicious individuals that our residents take a closer look also at how they spend the village's money. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Kavanaugh. Marsh?
The DuPage Department of Homeland Security has extended COVID testing at the county through September, and they are still looking for volunteers to help direct traffic and a few other things. If you're inclined to give them a hand, they could really use your help, and you can find more information on the county website. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Greg?
Mayor, I have no report. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have no report either. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all.